Alexander of Macedonia waged many wars and slaughtered the kings of the earth. He made his way to the end of the earth. He despoiled many nations. He was exalted and ruled over the heathens. He fell sick, divided his kingdom among his servant friends. After he died, they all put crowns on, excuse me, and did much evil in the earth. A sinful offspring called Antiochus Epiphanes became king of the Greek Empire. Other lawless men arose out of Israel and made a treaty with the heathen, and gymnasiums were built. Okay, that's 1 Maccabee 1:14, that they built the gymnasiums. Antioch wanted to be king of Egypt. He entered into it with forces. Sorry guys, the spill on my paper has wiped away some of these letters here. He entered it with forces of elephants and made war on Ptolemy, king of Egypt. He plundered the land against Israel and entered Jerusalem with force. He took gold and furniture. A great mourning throughout Israel. 2 years later, the king sent a tax collector to collect tribute from the inhabitants of Judah. He spoke peacefully and they trusted him. Then he struck their city with a great blow and destroyed many in Israel. The city of David became their citadel. 1 Maccabee 1:30. The king ordered everyone to give up their own religious practices, and many of Israel obeyed, because the penalty for disobeying the king was death. He appointed inspectors over the people, and the real Israel went into hiding to worship. This unholy king erected a dreadful desecration upon the altar and burned the books of law. On the 25th of the month, they offered sacrifices on their altar. They persecuted the Lord's people. If women obeyed God's law and circumcised their children, they hung and killed mother and baby together. Yet some of the men in Israel stood firm and resolved not to eat what was unclean. They preferred death to sinning. A man named Matthias, my notes say the son of John, seeing his people Israel being ruined, he put on sackcloth and grieved. Then the king's officers, who were forcing the people to give up their religion, came down to town and said to Matthias, "Carry out the king's command and be friends of the king and be distinguished with silver and gold." And Matthias said, "I and my sons will live according to the agreement of our forefathers. We will not abandon the law and the ordinances of God." Then the heathen went to offer a pagan sacrifice on their pagan altar, and Matthias, filled with zeal and aroused to anger, slaughtered him, tore down their altar. Then he fled to the mountains, but other law followers went down into the wilderness, and the king's agents pursued them and attacked them on the Sabbath day, and they died. Matthias heard about it and resolved to defend himself if attacked on the Sabbath day. Also the Hasidians, they were warlike Israelites, joined them, and they mustered a force and struck down the sinners. Matthias and his friend went and tore down the heathen altars and forcibly circumcised all the children within the limits of Israel. So they rescued the law from the hands of the heathen and did not let the sinners triumph. He said, "Be zealous for the law, giving your lives for the agreement. Be strong for the law, for by it you will obtain glory." He said, "Listen to Simon your brother. Judas Maccabeus will be your captain and conduct the people's warfare. You must gather around you all who obey the law and avenge the wrongs of your people. Give heed to what the law commands." He blessed them and then he died. His son Judas, who was called Maccabeus, rose in his stead. God's people had a military captain, their leader. He punished and hunted all those who disobeyed the law, and he angered many kings. His memory is blessed. He went amongst the towns of Judah and destroyed the ungodly. He averted wrath from Israel. He was renowned to the ends of the earth and rallied those who were perishing. Meanwhile, Apollonius got the heathen forces from Samaria to make war on Israel. Judas learned of it and went out to meet him and killed him, took spoil, including his sword. And Judas fought with Apollonius' sword till the day he died. Then the Syrian army went out to make war on Judas because he set the king's commandment at naught. Judas went with a few men, and his men said, "How can we fight such a strong host? We haven't even eaten today." Judas said, "There's no difference in the sight of heaven between saving through many or through few. Victory in war does not depend on the size of the force. Strength comes from heaven. He himself will crush them before us because we are fighting for our lives and our law. Be not afraid of them." Judas fell on them suddenly, and Saron and the Syrian army were crushed. Fear of Judas began to fall upon the heathen around them. When Antiochus heard reports, he was angry. He opened his treasury and gave his forces a year's pay in advance and told them to be ready. He then saw the money in his treasury was exhausted because the tribute was small due to the divisions and distresses that he brought upon the land by doing away with the laws that were in effect from the earliest times. He was very perplexed, and he feared that he would not have enough for his lavish gifts. So he resolved to go to Persia and get tribute off those countries. He left Lysias in charge while he went. Lysias gave half of the forces and elephants to Antiochus and orders about everything he wanted done, which was to send a force to crush Israel and settle aliens in their borders and distribute their land among them. The king and the other half of the forces set off from Antioch, the royal city. Lysias chose warlike men, 40,000 friends of the king, and he sent them to Judah to destroy it. They camped near a town called Emmaus. The merchants of the country heard about it and took a great quantity of gold and silver and fetters and came to get the Israelites for slaves. They were joined by forces from the Syria and the Philistines. Judah saw the situation and said, "Let us repair the destruction of our people." The congregation gathered ready to make for war. They prayed for mercy and asked for compassion. They fasted, put on sackcloth and ashes and torn clothes, and unrolled a law scroll, which had some pictures of the heathen idols. They brought the first fruits and the tithes and gathered the Nazarites that had fulfilled their vows. They cried to heaven, "The priests are humiliated. The heathens have gathered to destroy us," and they sounded trumpets. Judas appointed officers, colonels, captains, lieutenants, and sergeants. He ordered those men who were building houses, planting vineyards, or betrothed to women, or who were just afraid, to go home, as the law provided. The army moved and camped south of Emmaus, and Judas said, "Be brave and ready to fight, for it is better for us to die in battle than to witness the ruin of our nation." Then Gorgios got to the camp, but they had just left and it was empty. Judas appeared with 3,000 men in not the best armor and swords. They saw the horsemen patrolling the fortified camp, and Judas told his people, "Don't be afraid. Remember how our forefathers were saved at the Red Sea when Pharaoh pursued them? Now let us cry to God of heaven, if perhaps he will accept us and remember his agreement with our forefathers and crush the camp before us today. Then the heathen will know that there is one who ransoms and preserves Israel." 1 Maccabees 4:11. Then non-Israel aliens lifted up their eyes and saw the army, and Judas sounded the trumpet and attacked the heathen and killed 3,000 men. Judas and his forces returned from the pursuit of them and said, "Don't set your hearts on the plunder, for there's still yet a battle before us. Gorgias and his army are here in the mountains. Stand your ground against our enemies and fight them. Afterwards you could take spoils." While Judas was still speaking, a second detachment appeared from the mountains, and they saw Judas's army ready to attack. They fled to the land of the Philistines. The Lord's valiant people plundered, taking a great deal of gold, silver, sapphire, sea purple, and great wealth. Sea purple. And then they returned singing and blessing God in heaven. Then the aliens who escaped and reported to Lycia all that happened, who was sad. It didn't turn out like the king ordered. So, in the following year, he gathered 60,000 picked men to conquer Israel. And Judas came at them with 10,000 men. They prayed, "Blessed are you, Savior of Israel, who stopped the rush of the champion by the hand of your slave David, and delivered the Philistine camp into the hands of Jonathan, the son of Saul." 1 Maccabees 4:31. They prayed to God to shut up the camp into the hand of the people Israel, and let them be ashamed of their armies and horsemen and their strength. Strike them down with the sword of them those that love you. Let all who know your name praise you with hymns. HYMNS. Then they joined battle, and Lysias' army fully fell. All 5,000 men fell right before them. When Lysias saw that his army fell, and that Judas was boldly ready to live or die nobly, he withdrew to Antioch and hired more soldiers in the greatest number to come against Judea. Judah and his brothers said, "Now our enemies are crushed. Let us go up and purify the sanctuary and rededicate it." They went to Mount Zion. They found the sanctuary desolated. Doors were burned off. Weeds were growing inside. The priests' quarters were torn down. They tore their clothes and uttered great lamentations, covered themselves with ashes and fell on their faces, and sounded ceremonial trumpets and cried out to heaven. Judas appointed men to fight the garrison, the paid soldiers in the citadel, and he appointed law-abiding priests without blemish, and they purified the sanctuary and deliberated and decided to take down the whole altar so that it might never be thrown up, that the heathens polluted it. They put the stones in the temple mountain until a prophet should come and declare what to do with them. They took the whole stones as the law required and built a new altar, and built a sanctuary and consecrated courts, and made new holy dishes, burned incense, put out bread, and hung curtains. On the 25th day of the 9th month of Chislev, they offered sacrifices according to the law. It was rededicated with songs and harps, and all the people fell on their faces and blessed God, which prospered them. They celebrated the rededication of the altar for 8 days. That's what we call Hanukkah. They decorated it with gold crowns, small shields. There was great joy because of the reproach of the heathen was wiped out. Judas declared the days of the rededication of the altar should be observed with gladness and joy every year for 8 days, beginning the 25th of the month. That's somewhere around 1 Maccabees 4:32. A little after that, maybe. They built walls and strong towers around Mount Zion. They established a force where to hold it. He fortified Berthuzza too, so that the people had a stronghold facing Idumeen. When the heathens heard the altar had been rebuilt, they were angry and resolved to destroy the descendants of Jacob. Sorry. They began to kill. Judas fought against the sons of Esau, and he crushed them. Remembering old wickedness, burned towers. He passed on to the Ammonites, found Timotheus in command. He fought them many times. Meanwhile, the heathen gathered against them. They sent a letter to Judas saying, "The heathens have gathered against us to destroy us. They are preparing to seize their stronghold when they take refuge. So, come rescue us. Many of our brothers have been in the district of Tob, T-O-B. Their wives and their children are taken captive. Their property, they destroyed a regiment of men, and they were still reading when the messengers from Galilee came with torn clothes and a message to the same effect, saying, Ptolemais, Tyre and Sidon and all of Galilee aliens have gathered against them to destroy them. Judas and his people had a meeting. Judas said to Simon, choose men to go and save our brothers who are in Galilee, and I and Jonathan will go to Gilead. He left Joseph to guard the place with orders, saying, take command of these people. Do not join battle with the heathen until we return. Simon went to Galilee with 3,000 men, and Judas went into Gilead with 8,000 men. The heathen were beaten. Judas Maccabeus and his brothers crossed the Jordan and encountered the Nabateans, met them peacefully. Judas killed some more men. At daybreak, Judas said the battle had begun and cried to heaven, and he told his men to fight for our brothers today. Armies fell before the Maccabees. God was with them. Judas sent men to recon the camp, and they reported that the heathen are gathered and have hired Arabs to help them in readiness to attack. Judas went out to meet them. His crew advanced across the stream, and the heathen were beaten again. They were traveling, needing to get through the Euphron, a strong and fortified town. They sent peaceful messages, but they wouldn't let them pass through. So they camped and fought the city all day and destroyed every male and plundered and passed right through. Judas kept gathering up those who fell behind and encouraging all the people all the way till they reached Judah. When Judas and Jonathan were in Gilead, Simon in Galilee, Joseph, Azariah, wanted to make a name for themselves by fighting the heathen. They marched to Jamnia. Georgius and his men came to meet them in battle. 2,000 men of Israel died. They did not belong to the family of those who were permitted to save Israel. Judas made war on the sons of Esau in the south and set off to the land of the Philistines. Some priests fell in battle because they wished to distinguish themselves. Judas went to Azotus and tore down the altars, burned the carved images. Meanwhile, King Antioch was making his way to town. He heard of in Persia called Elymas, renowned for its silver and gold. He tried to take the city, but couldn't. Then someone came to him and told him all that happened, and that Judas had grown strong by the quantity of arms. And he took down the horror on top of the altar. The king was shaken and went into bed, fell sick, concluded that he would die, called his friends, and said, "I remember the wrongs that I did Jonathan, taking gold and silver dishes and destroying the inhabitants without cause. Now I'm dying in a strange land." He put Philip in charge of the whole kingdom. Okay, and I think we still have a King Philip out there, right? Just saying. He put Philip in charge of the whole kingdom and gave him a signet ring. His son Antioch reigned in his stead, changing his name to Eupator. The men in the citadel kept harassing Israel and giving support to the heathen. So Judas planned to destroy them, and there was a siege and blockage. Some escaped, and some ungodly Israel went with them. And they went to the king and said, "How long will you delay doing justice for us? We agreed to serve your father and conduct ourselves in accordance with his laws, and now, on account of this, the sons of our people have besieged us, put us to death, plundered our property." They encamped against the citadel in Jerusalem to capture it. Act quickly, or you won't be able to check them. When the king heard this, he was angry, gathered his army's officers, his friends, and the people in charge of cavalry and mercenary forces. Came from other kingdoms and from the islands, including 32 elephants trained for war. They got up early and showed the elephants the juice of grapes and mulberries to entice them to battle. They stationed each elephant with 1,000 men in chain armor and brass helmets on their head. There were wooden towers upon the elephant, strong and covered over, ingeniously fastened on, and on each one were 4 powerful men who fought upon them beside the Indian driver. They stationed and took shelter in the fan axles, a cop formation. When the sun fell on the gold and brass shields, the mountains flashed back and shone like blazing torches. They advanced. Judah advanced, and 600 men from the king's army fell. Eleazar Avaron noticed one of the animals was armed with royal armor and stood higher than the others, and he thought that the king was on it, and he gave his life for his people. He slipped under the elephant and slashed its underneath belly and killed it, and it fell on top of him and he died. But the men of the king's armies went up to Jerusalem to meet them, and they made peace with the men. They evacuated the town because there was no food to support a siege, as it was a sabbatical year. The king stationed a garrison, a paid soldier, to hold it. They encamped against the sanctuary with war engines and machines to throw fire and stones. They fought for a long time, but the provisions in the storehouse were low because of all the people taking refuge in Judea from the heathen. Lycia heard that Philip, the new king to replace Antioch, was trying to get control of the government. he agreed to withdraw and come to terms with them before the provisions run out. Let's make peace with them, that they shall follow their own laws. And the king's office made an oath with them. But when the king went to Mount Zion and he saw the strength of the place, he broke the oath and gave orders to tear down its walls. King returned to Antioch and found Philip in possession of it, fought against him, and took the city by force. Demetrius came with Rome and went to Antioch and seized Antioch and Lysis and killed them. Demetrius took his seat upon the throne in Antioch. The lawless and ungodly men of Israel went to him and said, Judas and his brethren destroyed all your friends. Punish them. The king chose Governor Bacchides for the job. He came with a strong force against the land of Judah, but with a peaceful message in guile. Judas paid no mind to their guile. The Hasidians wanted peace. They said, a priest of the blood of Aaron came with force and will do us no wrong. He talked peaceably and made an oath not to injure them. They trusted him, and he arrested 60 of them and killed them, just as he said, who the flesh and blood of your saints they scattered around Jerusalem, none to buy them. Fear fell upon the people. There is no truth or justice in them. They broke the oath. Bacchides left Jerusalem, seized many of his deserters, slaughtered them, threw them in a great pit. That's 1 Maccabees 7. Could be the very end of 6. He established aliens over the country, alchemists thrown to maintain his priesthood. He took possession of the land of Judah and did great harm in Israel. Judas saw the damage. He took vengeance. Alchemists went to the king. The king sent Nicanor, distinguished officers who hated Israel bitterly. He went with a strong force and a deceitfully peaceful message. He came to Judas, greeted each other peacefully, but they were ready to kidnap Judas. Judas realized what they were planning and would not meet them again. Nicanor knew his plans were discovered and went out to meet Judas in battle, but they fled to the city of David. Nicanor went up to Mount Zion. Priests came out of the sanctuary, greeted him peacefully, and showed him the whole burnt offerings being offered for the king. He jeered at them, demanded Judas and his army be delivered into his hands, or he will burn the house up. He went away in anger. The priests, wild, said, take vengeance on this man. Let him fall by the sword. Nicanor met with the Syrian army. Judas prayed, when the king's men uttered blasphemy, your angel went and struck down 185,000, crushed this army before us today in the same way. The armies met in battle. Nicanor's army was beaten, and he himself was the first to fall in battle. His army then threw down their arms and fled. Eventually, they all fell by the sword. They cut off Nicanor's head and right hand, which he stretched out so arrogantly. and displayed them in Jerusalem. They observed that day as a great day of gladness and decreed it should be annually observed on the 13th of Adam. The land was quiet for some time. Then Judas heard the reputation of the Romans, that they were powerful and favored those who joined them, and established friendly relations with those who approached them. The Romans told the people about their wars and their exploits among the Gauls, how they subdued them and made them pay tribute, and also about what they did in Spain, taking possession of the gold and silver mines, and how they had become masters of the whole regions, though they were very far away from them. They also preached about the kings that came against them from the ends of the earth until they crushed them and inflicted great losses upon them, and how the rest pay tribute every year. They crushed Philip and Perseus, the king of Chittim, and how Antiochus, the great king of Asia, marched against them as was beaten. A section of Indian Media Lydia had been taken from him and given to King Eumenes. Men of Greece had planned to come and destroy. They sent one general against them. The Romans took wives and children captive. I'm going to say that one more time. The Romans took wives and children captive. They plundered and conquered the land and tore down strongholds and enslaved them to this day. Romans destroyed and enslaved all other kingdoms, islands that ever opposed them. But they maintained friendly relations with their friends and those who relied upon them. Romans conquered kings far and near, and the people were afraid of them. They set up kings and disposed of kings, like the mafia. They never put on a crown or wore purple. They built themselves a Senate house. Every day, 320 men deliberated constantly, planning for the people. And they entrusted their government to one man every year. Judas chose expense and sent him to Rome to establish friendly relations with them so that they might relieve them of their yoke, the Greek yoke, as they saw Greeks reducing Israel to slavery. So he went to Rome into the Senate house and said, Judas, who's called Maccabees, and his brother and the Jewish people sent us to you to make an alliance and firm peace, that we may be enrolled as allies and friends. The Romans were pleased with this offer. This is a copy of the letter which they wrote in answer on brass tablets. Good fortune to the Romans and to the Jewish nation, by sea and land forever. Aye, the sword be far from us, but if war is made on Rome first or any of her allies, the Jewish nation will act as their allies and supply no wheat, no arms, no money, and no ships to those who make war on them, as Rome decides. In like manner, if war is made on the Jewish nation first, the Romans will act as their allies, and no wheat, no arms, no money, and no ships will be supplied as Rome decides. On these terms, Romans made a treaty with the Jews. But if hereafter one part or another decides to add or subtract to it, whatever they add or subtract will be valid. As for the Greeks bothering you, we have written to King Demetrius, asking why he has made the yoke so heavy upon our friends the Jews. But if they appeal against you and continue to oppress you, we will side with them and make war on you, by land and by sea. That's probably 1 Mac 7-8. When Demetrius heard Nicanor and troops had fallen in battle, he sent Bacchides and Alchemists into Judah a second time. Judas's army had slipped away and was few. Judas wanted to fight the large number, but his people wanted to wait for reinforcement. Judah said he will never flee from them, but he would prefer to die bravely. They advanced and made war, and many died on both sides. After Judas, including Judas Maccabeus. His brothers buried him and mowed him. After Judas died, all the lawless raised their heads over Israel, and there was a great famine. Bacchides chose ungodly men to appoint them as masters of the country. They sought out the friends of Judas and punished them. There was distress in Israel that had not been seen since the time the prophets ceased to appear to them. So Judas's friends went to Jonathan and said, "Since Judas died, there has been no one like him to go in and out against our enemies." Bacchides, the governor, and the hostile... Oh, hold on. There was distress in Israel that had not been since the time the prophets ceased to appear to them. So Judas's friends went to Jonathan and said, "Since Judas dies, there's been no one like him to go in and go out against our enemies." Bacchides, the governor, and the hostile citizens. "So we chose you, Jonathan, to be our ruler and carry out our war." Jonathan accepted and took the place of Judas Maccabeus. Bacchides learned of this and tried to kill him. Jonathan fled to the wild country of Tekoa and camped. Jonathan sent his brother to entreat the Nabateans as friends to get them to watch their great deal of baggage while they went to war. Hey, looks like United States slaughtered one. One lawful one. They seized the messenger. news came to Jonathan that these people, these sons of Jambri, were having a great wedding with the daughter of one of the great nobles of Canaan. So they went up and hid under the shelter of the mountain, and they saw the bridegroom and his friends had come with drums, musicians, and weapons. Then Jonathan fell upon them and killed them and took spoils. So the wedding turned into grief and lamentation. Bacchides heard of it and came with a strong force. Jonathan stretched out his hand to strike back Bacchides and gave ground before him. Bacchides' men fell, returned to Jerusalem, built fortified towns, strongholds in Jerusalem and other places. He put garrisons in to harass Israel and took the sons of principal men as hostages and put them in custody at the citadel. That's 1 Mac 9:53. In the year 153, in the second month, Alchemists gave orders to tear down the sanctuary. And Alchemist, was then stricken, and he was paralyzed. His mouth stopped. He died in agony. The land was quiet for 2 years. Then all those who disregarded the law were mad that Jonathan and his peeps live undisturbed and secure. So they called Governor Bacchides to arrest them. He sent letter to all his allies in Judah to arrest Jonathan, but they could not. They seized 50 men who were ringleaders in this wickedness and killed them. Jonathan withdrew, and Bacchides fought against them a long time with siege engines. And Jonathan went with a small force and struck down Odomarera and fought Bacchides. Bacchides was angry with his unlawful advisors. He resolved to go home. Jonathan sent envoys to make peace with him and to obtain a release of the prisoners. Bacchides agreed not to injure him as long as he lived. Prisoners were released, and the sword ceased in Israel. Jonathan lived in Michmash. Jonathan began to judge the people, and he destroyed the ungodly from Israel. The 160th year, Alexander Epiphanes went up and took possession of Ptolemais and became king. They welcomed him. When King Demetrius heard it, he mustered forces to battle him. Demetrius sent a letter to Jonathan in peaceful terms. For Demetrius said to himself, "Let us make peace with him," before Alexander, and gave him authority to muster troops and gave orders to turn over the hostages in the citadel. The men in the citadel were dreadfully frightened. He had been given authority to muster troops. Hostages were turned over to Jonathan, who released them to their parents. He began to renovate the city building, 4 stories around Mount Zion. The foreigners who were guards in the prison went back to their own country. King Alexander went to make peace with Jonathan too, and sent a letter saying, "We heard you are a valiant warrior, fit to be our friend. Today we appoint you as high priest over your nation, to be called friends of the king." They sent him a purple robe and a gold crown. Jonathan put on the vestments at the camping out festival. Demetrius was annoyed in not wanting Alexander to have more favor. He wrote Jonathan another note, too. King Demetrius sends greetings to the Jewish nation. Continue to keep faith with us, and we will deal favorably with you and grant you many exemptions, free you all Jews from paying the tribute and the salt tax and the crown tax. And I surrender the right to take portions of your grain and fruit from this day forward, from your land of Judea and from the 3 districts attached to it. Let Jerusalem, her treasury, her tithes, and her taxes be holy and free. That was 1 Maccabees 10:32. I relinquish over citadel and give it to the high priest to put garrisons in it. And every Jewish person who has been carried into captivity I set at liberty without payment. Let all officials cancel debts upon the cattle, vet bills, and let all the festivals 3 days before and 3 days after be exemptions and immunity for all Jews in my kingdom. None shall have authority to exact anything from them. "30,000 Jews will be enrolled in king's forces, will receive pay, as all the king's forces have a right to do. And those who are set over them and those that govern them shall be of their own. They shall follow their own laws, and nations added to Judea shall be considered one man and obey the high priest. I pledge 15 silver shells from the king's revenue every year from every province that is convenient to be paid to the temple. Also the 5,000 shekels we took from you yearly is canceled, for it rightfully belongs to the priests. The cost of rebuilding, renovating fabric of the sanctuary will one out of the king's revenues." When Jonathan heard these terms, he didn't believe them or accept them. They took Alexander's side, as he had been first in addressing them in peaceful terms. King Alexander gathered large forces and camped against Demetrius. They joined battle. Demetrius fled. Alexander pursued and defeated him. Alexander sent envoys to Ptolemy, the king of Egypt, saying, "I have taken over the government, defeated Demetrius, and taken possession of the country. Let us now establish friendly relations with one another. Give me your daughter to be my wife, and I'll be your son-in-law." King Ptolemy answered, "Happy day! I will now do for you what you wrote. But meet me in Ptolemais, that we may see each other." Ptolemy came up with his daughter Cleopatra, and they celebrated her wedding with great pomp, as the kings do. Alexander wrote to Jonathan. They gave Jonathan silver and gold. Bad Israelites laid charges against him, but the king disregarded. Jonathan was closed in on purpose. He called his officers and said, "Go, make a proclamation in the city that no one is to appeal against or interfere with him." When those who were complaining saw him clothed in purple, they all fled. Jonathan was enrolled as best friends and was made general and governor. So Jonathan returned to Jerusalem with peace and gladness. Demetrius appointed Apollonius. They gathered strong force, sent to Jonathan the high priest. "You are all alone in resisting us, but I am laughed at and reproached because of you. Why do you claim your authority against us up in the mountains? If you trust in your troops, come down to the place and let us measure our strength together. For I have control of the town, so inquire who I am, and also the others that help us. For your forefathers have been routed twice in the land. Right now you will not be able to stand against this cavalry." When Jonathan heard the message, his heart was stirred. He chose 10,000 men and set out. Simon joined him. They fought the garrison in Joppa and took possession of it. Apollon's herd and mustered 3,000 horsemen marched to Azotus. In the plain, armies joined battle. Jonathan learned of the ambush. They surrounded him and showered arrows morning till evening. Jonathan's people stood fast, the enemy's horses tired out. Simon advanced and joined the battle with the Phalanx, the Cop formation. The enemy fled and took refuge in Beth Dragon and Dagon. 8,000 people died. Jonathan pitched against Ascalon, was met with great pomp. John returned to Jerusalem, and King Alexander treated John with great distinction and sent him a gold buckle, and they gave him the land of Ekron. The king of Egypt gathered strong forces and wanted to steal Alexander's kingdom. He set out for Syria with a peaceful professions, and the people opened their gate. When Ptolemy entered the towns and placed a garrison of troops in each town, when they reached Azotus, they showed him the temple Dagon burned, and the pile of burned corpses heaped in his way. They blamed Jonathan. and the king was silent. Jonathan met the king with pomp at Joppa. Jonathan traveled with the king and returned. Ptolemy made himself master of the coast and forced wicked designs about Alexander. He sent envoys to Demetrius, saying, "Come." Sorry to all of you guys. See what I'm reading from? This is my paper. I own this copyright. I wrote this paper. This is my 16-page summary of Maccabees. So when Jonathan heard these terms, he didn't believe them or accept them. King Alexander gathered large forces and camped against Demetrius. They joined battle. Demetrius fled. Alexander pursued and defeated him. Alexander sent envoys to Ptolemy, the king of Egypt, saying, "I have taken over the government and defeated Demetrius." Taken possession of the country. Is that the last page we just read? Sorry, guys. Camera fell. Okay, no, we're in chapter 11. That's where we are. 1 Maccabees, chapter 11. King of Egypt gathered strong forces, wanted to steal Alexander's kingdom, set out for Syria with the peaceful possessions, and the people opened their gate. When Ptolemy entered, he placed a garrison of troops in each town. When they reached Azotus, they showed him the temple Dagon burned, the pile of burned corpses heaped in the way. They blamed Jonathan, and the king was silent. Jonathan met the king with pomp at Joppa. Jonathan traveled with the king and returned. Ptolemy made himself master of the coast, forced wicked designs about Alexander. He sent envoys to Demetrius, saying, "Come, let us agree, and I'll give you my daughter, who Alexander had, and you shall reign over your father's kingdoms." I regret having given him my daughter, for he has undertaken to kill me. But he threw the blame back on him because he converted his kingdom. So the daughter was removed from Alexander, estranged, and given to Demetrius. Then the enmity began to manifest. Ptolemy entered Antioch and assumed the diadem of Asa. He put on 2 crowns, that of Egypt and that of Asia. King Alexander was in Sicily at the time, so for the people of those regions were in revolt. Alexander marched against Ptolemy and routed him. Alex fled to Arabia, and Ptolemy was triumphant. And Zabdiel the Arab cut off Alexander's head and sent it to Ptolemy. 3 days later, Ptolemy died, and the men in the strongholds were destroyed by the men of the strongholds. Demetrius became king in the 167th year. In those days, Jonathan mustered men to attack the citadel, and some breakers of the law hated their own nation. When the king reported to him that Jonathan was besieging the citadel, the king wrote to Jonathan not to continue the siege and to meet for a conference. Jonathan gives orders to continue the siege. He selected elders and put himself in danger by meeting King Ptolemy. He took presents with him. The king showed him great honor in front of the lawless. He was confirmed in the high priesthood as chief of the best friends. Jonathan asked the king to free Judah and the 3 provinces and Samaria from the tribute. He promised him 300 talents, and the king agreed and wrote letters to Jonathan. King Demetrius sends greetings to his brother Jonathan and the Jewish nation. This letter to you is CC'd to our kinsman Lathinis. King Demetrius sends greetings to his hater listeners. We have determined to favor the Jewish nation, our new friends, because of the goodwill they have shown to us. So we recognize Judas as their territory, along with the 3 districts of Aphaeresis. Aphaeresis. Lydia and Ramadan transferred from Samaria to Judea. We henceforth make over to them the royal dues, produce from the land, tithal dues, salt pits, and crown tax, and none of these things shall be annulled from this time forever. Take care to make a copy of this and give it to Jonathan. Set it up in a prominent place on the holy mountain. King Demetrius saw the country was quiet before him, and there was no opposition. He dismissed all his troop except the foreign forces that he hired from the islands of the heathens. Old soldiers had a grudge against him. Trypho was one of Alexander's old party. Saw the troops grumbling and Demetrius. So he went to meet the Arabs who was raising Antiochus, the son of Alexander. And he insisted that the child be turned over to become king in his father's place. He reported that all Demetrius had done. Then Jonathan sent to Demetrius, asking him to tell the garrison from the citadel and the garrisons from the stronghold, because they kept fighting against Israel. And Demetrius sent a note to Jonathan and said, I will not only do this for you and all nations, if I find an opportunity, so please send me men who will fight for me, for all my troops are in revolt." Jonathan sent 3,000 able-bodied men to Antioch, gathered in the midst of the city and wanting to kill the king. People began to fight. The king summoned the Jews to his aid. They set the city on fire. They took spoil and saved the king. When the people saw that the Jews controlled the city, they cried to the king, saying they pleased their hearts, failed them. "Give us your pledge to make the Jews stop fighting us." They made peace. The Jews were in high honor with the king and his peeps. King Demetrius sat on his throne. The land was quiet before him. But he lied a lot and became estranged from Jonathan, and he did not return favors and treated him harshly. And after this, Trypho returned with the little child Antiochus. And he became king, and all the troops that Demetrius had cast off rallied about him and fought against Demetrius, were routed and fled. Trypho took the animals and took possession of Antioch. Youthful Antiochus wrote to Jonathan, saying, "I confirm you in the high priesthood and appoint you over districts to be the king's friend." He sent gold plate and table service and gave them the right to drink out of gold goblets and wear purple and gold. He made Simon governor of the ladder, from the ladder of Tyre to the frontier of Egypt. Syria wanted to ally with Jonathan, and Jonathan traveled. Ascalon received him with honor, but Gaza shut their gates on him. So he laid siege on it, fired on its suburbs, plundered them. Then the people of Gaza asked for terms, and he gave them his pledge and took the sons of their leaders as hostages, sent them to Jerusalem, and went to Damascus. Jonathan heard officers Demetrius were at Kadesh in Galilee with a strong force, asking to remove him from office. So he went to meet them. Simon stayed in Bethsaida for a while and shut it, took possession of town and put a garrison in it. Jonathan and his army pitched camp by the water of Gennesaret, and early in the morning they went to the plain of Hazor. Foreigners had set an ambush for him, but they themselves met him face to face. But the ambush rose out of their place and joined battle. All who were on Jonathan's side fled except Captain Matthias. Wow. Jonathan tore his clothes and threw dust on his head and prayed. He battled them and they fled. His troops rejoiced him, helped him, and he went home to Jerusalem. 1 Maccabees 12. Jonathan sent men to Rome to renew the friendly relations and notified the Spartans' army. He went into their Senate house and said, "Jonathan, the high priest and the Jewish people sent us to renew friendly relations." He delivered letters to them and asked for a peaceful send-off. This is what Jonathan wrote to the Spartans. Jonathan and the Council of Nations and priests and Jewish people send greetings to their brothers, the Spartans. Enclosed is a copy of the former letter to the high priest Ananias from Arius, who was your king then, saying that you Spartans are our kinsmen. One Sissa accepted the letter which contained the alliance and friendliness. We are in no need of your letter of friendliness, since we find encouragement in the sacred books. So, we have undertaken to renew relations of brotherhood and friendliness with you, so that we may not be estranged from you. We remember you in the sacrifices and prayers, as it is right and proper to remember kinsmen. We rejoice in your renown. Many hardships and wars beset us. Kings around us made war on us. We have not wished to trouble you, for our help comes from heaven. We have been saved from our enemies. We want to renew friendly relations and alliance with the Romans and you Spartans. Please reply. This is a copy of the letter that they sent to Ananias. Arius, king of the Spartans, sends greetings to Ananias, the chief priest. It has been found in a writing concerning Spartans and Jews that they are kinsmen and that they are descended from Abraham. Now that we have learned this, please write unto us about your welfare. We, for our part, write to you that our cattle and property, ours and ours are yours. We command them to report to you. Jonathan heard that Demetrius' officers had returned with stronger than before force to make war on him. He set out from Jerusalem and met them in Hamath. He sent spies to their camp and reported that they were planning a night attack. When the sun set, Jonathan ordered his men to be ready and under arms. The adversary heard that Jonathan's men were ready for battle, and they were frightened and lit fires in their camp. Jonathan saw the fires burning and pursued them, but could not overtake them because they crossed the river Eleutherus. Jonathan turned aside against the Arabs, who are called the Zabadeans, and defeated and plundered them. Simon took Joppa by surprise. Jonathan retreated, called together the elders, and planned to build strongholds in Judea to increase the height of the walls and build a great mound between the citadel and the city, to separate it by itself so that they could not buy or sell it. They gathered together to build up the city, and the part of the east wall by the ravine collapsed. He replaced it with so-called Chapinatha. Simon built Orden Loveland and fortified it with barred gates. Trypho undertook to become king of Asia. he raised his hand against King Antiochus. He was afraid of Jonathan would get in the way, and he undertook to seize and destroy him. Jonathan went out to meet him with 40,000 men. Trypho was afraid, so he received him with honor and gave him presents, introduced him to his friends, and gave him equal commands over his forces, and said to Jonathan, "Why have you burdened all these people when there's no war between us? Send them home. You and a few men come with me to Ptolemais, and I will turn it over to you, along with the rest of the prisons and forces and officials." Jonathan trusted him and did as he said, and dismissed his troops, and he took 1,000 with him. And when Jonathan entered Ptolemais, the people closed the gates and seized him, and they killed his troops with the sword. Trypho sent forces and cavalry to Galilee, the great plan to destroy all Jonathan's men. They thought Jonathan perished with his men. They encouraged one another and marched away in close order, ready to fight. And when the pursuers saw this, they turned back, and the Lord's people returned, and Judah mourned over Jonathan, and they were frightened, and all Israel mourned. The heathen around them rose up, saying, "They have no leader. Let's make war." Simon heard Trypho had gathered strong force to invade the land of Judea. He saw his people were afraid, and he encouraged them, saying, "You know all that I and my brothers and my father's house have done for the law and the sanctuary. As a result, my brother had perished for Israel's sakes. I never want to spare my own life, for I am no better than my brother, but I will avenge my nation, the sanctuary, your wives and children, because the heathen have gathered out of hatred to destroy us." The spirit of the people revived. They said, "You, Simon, are our new leader in place of Judas and Jonathan. Carry out our war. We'll listen to you." So he called the fighting men together and made haste to finish the walls of Jerusalem, and sent Jonathan, the son of Absalom, to Joppa, who drove out the men. Sorry, guys. If there's any water here, it's not my house. Prayers, please, for me and mine. Now, where were we, right? I don't have a pen over here. I should have marked it. Here we are. "Simon, you are our new leader in place of Jonathan and Judas. Carry out our war. We're listening to you." Called the fighting men together and made haste to finish the walls of Jerusalem, and sent Jonathan, the son of Absalom, to Joppa. Drove out the men. Trypho set out from Ptolemais to invade Judah, and he was holding Jonathan hostage. He wasn't dead. Trypho learned Simon had risen to take the place of Jonathan, and sent an envoy to him, saying, "It is for money that your brother Jonathan owed the royal treasury, in connection with the offices that he held, that we are holding him. Send 100 talents of silver and 2 of his sons as hostages, so that when he's released, he won't revolt against us, and we'll let him go. Simon knew that they were speaking treacherously. Yet he sent to get the money and the children, and he wanted to do everything he could to save Jonathan, lest the people would scoff and blame him. But Trypho wouldn't let Jonathan go. Morphic got his cavalry ready to go, but there was very heavy snow. So he killed Jonathan, and he was buried. And Simon got the bones of his brother and buried him in Modin. And Israel lamented for a long time. Simon built a high monument over the grave of his brother, and it was a polished stone. He erected 7 pyramids in a row, and he put trophies of Armin on columns for an everlasting memorial. And his carved the prows. The Modin monument still stands today. What was the name of that monument that popped up on people's TV that have a TV? Or I have to carry notebook around TVs when I go. It was some kind of thing. If you guys remember, let me know. Write it in there, please. Okay, this Modin monument still stands today. Trypho dealt treacherously with King Antiochus the Younger and killed him and became king in his place, and he assumed the diadem of Asia. And he brought a great calamity upon the country. Simon built strongholds, prisons with high towers, thick walls, buried gates, but he stored provisions in them. Simon chose men and sent them to King Demetrius that he should give the country relief from Trypho's plunderer. King Demetrius answered him by letter. King Demetrius sends greetings to Simon the high priest, the friend of the king, and to the Jewish elder and nation. We received the gold crown and palm branch that you sent. We are ready to make a lasting peace with you and write our official granting immunity you ask. We have guaranteed you the strongholds you have built shall be yours. We have forgiven any oversights up to this time, as well as the crown tax. Also, if any of you are a suitable person to be enrolled in there shall be peace between us. It was the 170th year that the yoke of the heathen be lifted from Israel, and the people began to write in their contracts and agreements in the first year of Simon, the great high priest, governor and commander of the Jews. Simon pitched camp against Gazara. The people asked for mercy. Simon came to terms with them, put them out of the city, purify the house where the idols were. He expelled all the impurifications and settled men in who observed the law. He built himself a dwelling there and fortified it. Men in the city were dying of starvation, and they cried out to Simon to make terms with them, and he did. And he expelled them from the citadel and purified it for its defilement. There was much rejoicing because of a great enemy had been destroyed out of Israel. Observe on the 236th day, but it's wrong. Something in the second month, to be observed with gladness. He and his men stayed at the Temple Mount facing the citadel, and Simon made his son John commander of all his forces. King Demetrius gathered forces and went to Medina to get help to fight Tryphos and Arsaces, the king of Persia. And Media heard that Demetrius was in town, and he went and captured Demetrius and defeated his army. The land of Judah was at peace so long as Simon lived. He sought the good of his nation. He took Joppa for report and made it an access to the islands of the sea. He enlarged his nation and became master of the land. He gathered many captives, removed things that defiled the nation. They cultivated peace, and the land yielded produce. Old men sat in the streets and talked about well-being. Young men put on splendor, warlike attire. He supposed towns with provisions. He and his renown spoken of to the ends of the earth. He made peace in the land. Israel rejoiced. No one was afraid. No one was left in the land to fight them, and the kings were destroyed. He reestablished all those who had been humbled. He reproved everyone who was lawless and wicked. He made the sanctuary glorious and increased equipment. It was reported in Rome as far as Sparta that Jonathan was dead. They grieved bitterly. They wrote to his brother Simon, the new high priest, on brass tablets to renew friendly relations and alliances. This is what the Spartans sent. The chief magistrates in the city of Sparta sends greetings to Simon, the chief priest. The elders, priests, and the rest of the Jewish people are kinsmen. We're glad to hear of your splendor and wealth. We record the following. Numius, the son of Antiochus, and Antidantes, the son of Jason, envoys of the Jews, came to us to renew their friendly relations with us. The people were pleased to receive the men with honor and to write among the public records and CC the high priest. Simon sent numbers in Rome with a great gold shield weighing 1,000 pounds to confirm their alliance. The people said, "How shall we thank Simon? For he and his brothers have stood fast and have driven the enemies of Israel and secured his freedom." On the 18th day of Elul, in the 172nd year, that is the 3rd year of Simon the high priest, prince of God's people, on frequent occasion when wars have arisen, Simon, the son of Matthias, the priest, exposed themselves to danger and resisted the adversaries of their nations, so that the sanctuary and the law might be upheld. They have reflected great glory upon this nation. Jonathan rallied his nation because their high priest was gathered to his people. Simon fought for his nation. He spent a great deal of money of his own. Armed, warlike men gave them wages. Fortified towns of Judea and Bethsura, where their enemies formerly kept their arms. He stationed a garrison of Jews there. He fortified Joppa on the sea coast and Gazaran on the border of Azotus, and settled Jews there and gave them means of restoration. When the people saw Simon's faithfulness and glory he designed to bring to his nation, that they made him leader. Because of uprightness and fidelity, and because he sought every way to exalt his people, the heathen were driven out of the country and out of the city of David and Jerusalem. The heathen built themselves a citadel, from which they would go out and pollute the surrounding sanctuaries and did great damage. Simon made the land and city safe, setting Jews in it, and built high walls, King Demetrius confirmed him in the priesthood and made him one of his friends, for he had heard that he was addressed by the Romans as friends, so he went along. They resolved Simon to be their leader. He set them duties over country, over arms, over fortifications, until a true prophet should appear. Only 2 pages left. 16-page report. We're just about to start, page 15. Simon made this land and city safe, setting Jews in it, building high walls. King Demetrius confirmed him in the priesthood and made him one of his friends, for he had heard that he was addressed by the Romans as friends, so he went along. They resolved Simon to be their leader, to set them duties over the country, over arms, over fortifications, until a true prophet should appear. And then he would take care of the sanctuary and should obey all contracts dated in his reign, and should be clothed in purple and gold. Nobody was allowed to gather in an assembly without him, or contradict what he said, or set his things aside. Disregarded shall be liable to punishment. And all the people agreed. Simon accepted and became their high priest, their general, and the governor of Jews and priests. They ordered this decree described on brass tablets and set up in a conspicuous place, and copies placed in the treasury, so that Simon and his sons might have it. Antiochus, the son of King Demetrius, sent a letter to the islands of the sea to Simon, and it ran as follows. King Antiochus sends greetings to Simon, the chief priest and governor, and the Jewish nation. As some ruffians have made themselves master of the kingdom of our forefathers, I wish to claim the kingdom, that I may restore it to its former state. And I have raised a large force of mercenaries and prepared ships of war, and propose to go land in the country and go in search of men who ruined our country. I now guarantee to you all the immunities which the king before me have granted you, and gifts too. I give you the authority to coin your own money for your country, with your own stamp. Jerusalem and her sanctuary shall be free. All the arms you have prepared and the provisions you have shall remain yours. Royal obligations shall be remitted for you from this time forever forth. And when we get possession of our kingdom, we will glorify you, Simon, and your nation and temple to the whole earth. Antiochus went to the country of his forefathers and pursued Trypho to Dor. News came back from Rome with letters to the king. Lucius, council of Romans, sends greetings to Ptolemy. The envoys of Jews came to us, and friends and allies, to renew friendly relations, having been sent by Simon the high priest and Jewish people. They brought a gold shield weighing 1,000 pounds. It is our pleasure, therefore, to write to the kings not to injure them or fight them or their towns and courts, not to ally themselves with those who fight against them. We have determined to accept the shield from them. So, if any miscreants from their country to yours flee over, hand them over to Simon, so that he may punish them according with the law. He wrote the same message to King Demetrius, and to Altulus, and to Eratosthenes, and sent to Arsaces, and to Samson, and to Spartans, and to Pamphilus, and to Lycia, and to Halicarnassus, and the Rhodes, and to Phalius, and to Cross, and to Side, and to Aradus, and to Gordes, and to Cornetus, and to Cyprus, and to Cyrenus. King Antiochus attacked Dor on the 2nd day, and Simon sent him 2 picked men to fight with him, along with silver and gold and war materials, but he wouldn't accept them, disregarded all agreements, and was estranged from him. he sent one of his friends named Athenanocus to him, saying, "You're holding up Joppa and Gazara and the citadel in Jerusalem, cities in my kingdom. You have done great injury to this country. Now, give the towns you have seized and tribute, or give me 500 talents of silver for the damage you have done, or else we will make war on you." So Athenas, the king's force, came to Jerusalem and saw Simon's splendor and great pomp, and was amazed, and gave him the king's message. And Simon said to him in reply, "We have neither taken other man's land, nor are we in possession of other man's property, but the inheritance of our forefathers. It was wrongfully held by our enemies at one time, but we will hold firmly that inheritance of our forefathers. As for Joppa and Gazara, which you demanded, while they have done great damage to our people, we will give 100 talents for them." And he went back to the king in anger and reported the words and splendor and all that he had seen, and the king was extremely angry. Trypho embarked a ship and fled to Orthosia. The king appointed Sennacherib commander-in-chief of a sea coast, and gave him infantry and cavalry. The bitches camped before Judea. King pursues Trypho. Sennacherib began to provoke people and invade Judea, and took people captive and killed them. He built the walls of Kidron and stationed forces so that they may go out in masks. I'm sorry, that they may go out and make raids on the highways, as the king ordered. John went up from Gazara and told his father Simon what Sindara had done. And Simon called in his 2 eldest sons, Judas and John, and said to them, "I and my brothers have fought the battles of Israel from our youth until today. We've succeeded in delivering Israel many times. But now I'm old and you're old enough. You must take my place and go out and fight for our nation, and help comes from heaven be with you." He chose 250,000 soldiers and cavalry and marched against Selandas, and there was a stream people were afraid to cross, and so he went first, and Sennacherib and his armies were routed. Many fell and were wounded. Judas, John's brother, was wounded. They burned the towers of Azotus and returned Judea in peace. Now Ptolemy, the son of Abbas, had been appointed governor over the plain of Jericho, and he had a great deal of silver and gold, for he was the son-in-law of the high priest. He heard was elated and plotted deceitfully against Simon to remove him. Simon was visiting towns and providing for their care. We went down to Jericho with the sons Matthias and Judas and Abus's sons, and deceitfully entertained them in a fortress called D-O-K. They had a great banquet, and when Simon and his sons were drunk, Ptolemy went into the banquet hall to attack Simon and killed him and his sons. It was a great act of treachery, returning evil for good. Ptolemy wrote to the king for aid. He sent people to take possession of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount, and ran ahead to Gazara and informed John that his father and brothers had perished, and they were coming to kill him. And he was amazed and seized the men who came to destroy him. And the rest of the acts of his wars and exploits, and the building of walls and his deeds, were written in the chronicles of the high priesthood as he became the high priest. That's it. Sorry. Water stain in a couple spots. Look those words up. Just one Maccabees. There's 2, but I don't have it done like that. New Year's Eve, we read the Flat Earth Bible course. If we make it that far, right? My 2020's been all right, I guess. I did call my lawyer, though, today. The lady who calls herself my lawyer. About the governor's order to shut down. The people aren't even secure. Alright, but thanks for listening. Let me know the name of that pillar. If you saw it on your TV. It's only like day 1 of Hanukkah, so I'll probably try to read this again.